you bring a Silicon Valley background. You co-started a tech startup company that works with carbon removal solutions using science and innovation, and now you wear a government hat. So my question is how would you say AI is making a difference in what you're doing in government, and how does your background in Silicon Valley influence how you're working with industry?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jackie. And maybe to the audience, we can invite everyone to join us, to sit down. Thank you all for taking the time to join us here today. Jackie, to answer your question, there's so much happening right now in Silicon Valley that is exactly the title of this panel, a disruptive mindset. There are technologies, there are business models. In DC, I even see the policy framework as offering new opportunities for disruption. And I work at the Department of Energy. I work on our climate change portfolio. I have never been more optimistic about our prospects of innovating our way into a more sustainable, emissions-free future. There is so much that's going on in Silicon Valley that I think offers enormous efficiency gains, abilities to do things that we potentially imagined years ago, but was science fiction, is now science fact. And all of that innovation, I think, is crossing over into areas of society that I think are solving really big problems. Climate change is the one that I see, but we've seen biotech have enormous impacts on vaccines in the pandemic, and all sorts of these innovations seem to be spilling over. And that, to me, gives me the most hope that all of that innovation ecosystem, whatever motivated it initially, whether it was to optimize clicks on search engines, is now starting to have these benefits where we can start to develop clean energy technologies faster than we ever thought possible. And that, to me, is what's really exciting.
Okay, and then Konstantin, you are looking at this from, you make things that fly in the air. And so you can make the case that, drones very much disrupted, the way goods are transported, and that AI has disrupted software engineering. Where do the two meet?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Jackie. The two meet essentially in the way that aerospace is a very heavily regulated industry, and for the foreseeable future, AI will mostly take the backseat currently, and it will be more of a tool to develop the networks and the operations so that we can use, for example, in our case, the fleet to be better managed and to allow us to not just be inherently 60% less fuel intensive, but also on a global scale to use way less fuel as opposed to any other commercial airline. So I would say that it's more of a tool as a kind of like a co-pilot, but not really the main pilot in the beginning. But like many people before me said, it's eventually just starting up. It's growing and it's ever learning. So who knows what the future will bring.
Right. Silvina, Unicoin builds itself as a more stable alternative for people who want to invest in crypto without the extreme volatility of early coins. And whereas other asset-backed stablecoins might use something more liquid, a highly liquid currency like dollars or euros, or dollar equivalents like treasuries, you're using real estate and property. Can you just explain, what is the advantage of using real estate and property for your backing, and where does AI fit into that?
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you everyone for joining us. We took a totally different approach, Jackie, to creating a crypto. As you said, early coins were kind of murky, very, very dark, and not only the volatility was an issue, but also the accountability and the transparency and the use of energy. So what we did was to create an SEC compliant, fully public reporting company that we developed to address those issues. And what we did, instead of using a real estate as a tokenization method for sort of slicing and dicing properties, we use it as a funding strategy. We trade Unicoin for real estate assets. To date, we have 2.3 billions in deals in real estate that are backing our coin that will be transferring to our balance sheet the moment that we tokenize. So this was our strategy to get the assets, to have the funding to develop a technology that is much more sensitive to the environment. What we all say, like, if Satoshi Nakamoto had built today, not 15 years ago, will be something that will look like what we are building. The impact on the environment is important, so we build in better technology, but we also allocated funds to give back, to make sure that we create initiatives to support. But this is basically the approach that we took. The assets give us liquidity, give us the capital to create better technology, to do good, instead of just to create volatility and kill the environment.
Okay, actually on that point, do good. I want to, there is a lot of talk about technology being a sort of equalizer for societies. We talk about democratizing access to services, and it's a question I would like to also bring Ram, you in on the question from your, MEA perspective, but also Silvina, because I think Unicoin, talks that it says part of its mission is to democratize assets to crypto investment. So I wonder, just curious how each of you or any of you really are thinking about that when you think about sort of AI as an equalizer.
Well, AI is an equalizer because it makes it easy, cheaper, and more efficient to get things done in many different industries. In our case, we are using AI to operate the company, from improving business and operations processes, but also we will use it to create better financial products. And when I say democratization, is crypto by definition was a democratization element because it allows to access investment opportunities to people that are not experts on investments, but we need to clean up the space. And by bringing better investment opportunities, we are making it easy, and by using AI to understand our audiences better, we are able to create the right products for the people.
Ram, do you have a question from your MEA perspective on this kind of idea of democratizing access, particularly for Africa and this region? How do you think about that question?
Absolutely, and just taking a leaf out of it, you said AI is an equalizer. I would say AI is both an equalizer and also a disruptor. The way things are happening here, Noah said there's a lot happening in Silicon Valley. I would rather question, has Silicon Valley moved to the Middle East? Because the kind of disruption, right place, right investment, right support system, right talent. The world seems to be converging in the Middle East. At least GCC, the three nations have taken sort of a foot start when it comes to adoption of many of the technologies. And I think the way it is different from the Western world is, I think Western world is a lot driven by the consumer and AI and democratization around that. I think this part of the world has seen it more towards the industrialization. So IT, OT, the sectors that are driving AI and democratization of AI is a little different in this part of the world, which is more driven by energy, utility, transportation, the sectors which are more pervasive in the sense of industrialization rather than consumerization. At the same time, again, a little known fact, I think the world's best fintech adoption is happening in Africa. The M-Pesas of the world is where, the mobile payment transactions had hit the roof. So for us, the way we see it is, I think it's time for reverse innovation. So there's a lot of innovation that's going to happen in the Middle East and Africa region and then get exported outwards. So yes, it is a democratization of a different sense.
Right. Okay, and I definitely want to come back to that with the kind of flip side of that equation. But before, you teed me up with the question of whether or not you think the Middle East will become the next Silicon Valley. I think you're very positive on that question.
Most definitely.
Tell us why.
Like I said, let's start. Silicon Valley had certain ingredients that made it what it was, right? It was the right timing. Middle East is in the crux of the right timing in terms of the way it has become a fulcrum of investments, a fulcrum of talent, a fulcrum of right strategy, an ecosystem of government that is very supportive of what is happening on the ground. So the ingredients are right there. Now, how do we tap into that? Also, the startup ecosystem surprisingly has emerged very vibrantly in the Middle East region. So each of the, right from the sovereign wealth funds of Qatar, UAE, Saudi have made massive investments. The local ecosystem support that is getting to be required. Qatar Foundation has got an initiative called Tamsu. Brilliant. Again, the idea is, can they take up certain units and then allow them to create startup ecosystems? And the same we are seeing across GCC and the nations. So we feel that, this is just the right time. Also, the nature of projects and programs. Where in the world are you seeing a NEOM? Where are you seeing an Oxygen? Where are you seeing an Octagon? Let's take the example of FIFA, the World Cup. Many say that probably, FIFA was an organizational, the challenge of setting up and running FIFA was the greatest outcome. To me, it was also a technological achievement. I don't know, little known fact, but the assets that created out of a World Cup like FIFA, I mean, I would certainly encourage everybody to go and visit the sports city out here and see the FIFA command center and see what the city has created, smart infrastructure, smart stadiums of the future, and the integrated ecosystem that then can be taken outwards to the rest of the world.
So actually, I don't want to put you on the spot, Noah, but you did work in Silicon Valley. Do you think this is the next Silicon Valley?
I actually don't think that's the right question.
Okay.
So Silicon Valley is notoriously, or maybe infamous for the venture capitalists not wanting to drive down the road to downtown San Francisco, let alone fly halfway around the world. And so I see an enormous opportunity not to say who's going to be the next Silicon Valley, but how do we network what happened in Silicon Valley in places all around the world and learn from each other in really important ways. We've seen that in the climate space. There's a climate tech accelerator that started in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a usual suspect place for that to happen, moved its second location to Houston, not necessarily what you associate with clean tech innovation in the US, but I think it's working remarkably well in attracting some of the capital from the fossil fuel industry that's historically been based there with the incredible engineering and innovation talent, but also learning from so many of the things that happened in that original accelerator. I don't see there needs to be a next Silicon Valley, but a network of Silicon Valleys that emerge around the world. And it will all go so much faster if we're able to share lessons learned and bring the best from both sides of the world together.
To be fair, that was Ram's question. And Ram, you did say initially that it could be a satellite as opposed to the next Silicon Valley. So I think it's a fair question. But I do want to complete the thought, with another thing you prompted me on, Ram, which was just how do you weigh, if you see this much potential, how do you weigh your optimism about the region against some of the political and social dimensions that we're talking about here today?
I mean, the region has always shown, and it's not new to unrest, but it has been very resilient. So if at all, and if you look at the history of the last 20 to 30 years to 40 years, GCC specifically has been very resilient. Is it a matter of concern? Definitely it's a matter of concern, which I presume, the geopolitical leaders are taking into cognizance, because what was going smooth suddenly has got a bump. But we presume that, as in the past, it will get resolved. So we feel that it's a temporary blip that comes every now and then, and it's not just here but across the world. So Middle East is no different from what we see in Europe or what we see in Americas. And I think this should just pass. So we feel that the countries have learned a lot in the past, and they will find a way to reconcile and make it work for everyone.
I definitely want to bring the entire panel in, and Konstantin, please weigh in on this as well. But Silvina, you mentioned this idea of sort of the high demand, energy demand, of crypto, and I just want to throw a couple of interesting factoids at the panel. So the International Energy Agency says that global electricity demand from data centers, crypto, and AI could more than double over the next 3 years, adding the equivalent of Germany's entire power need. And then I think the ARM CEO last month said that AI's power needs basically puts us on course to use more electricity than the most populous country in the world right now, India. So I guess I just wonder, I'm putting this out there to all of you, but do you ever worry that the energy demands of this important technology maybe is overwhelmed? The supply basically, or demand overwhelms supply?
Yes, of course. Global change is a thing. We are all living it every single day. I think it's something to worry, but it's also new disruptions and new technologies that are becoming mainstream. And also, I think to also support the point on the prior discussion point, it's a generational change. A massive generational change is driving a massive change in the way that we live, we think, we act. The Generation C cares much more about the environment than what we traditionally care, and they will drive a lot of adjustment on how companies operate, because they will not want to buy from companies that are not sensitive to the environment. And also Generation C is a generation that is much more inclined to be an entrepreneur than my generation. When I was at school, it was plan B to be an entrepreneur. It was what you did between jobs, or if you didn't find any job. So I think that as it comes the problems, it will also come the solution. As per the distribution, or if it's Middle East, the next Silicon Valley, I think Silicon Valley is very 80s. It's like kind of a parody from HBO. What I believe now is the world is remote. People are digital nomads. Traveling is not a problem, but it's actually something that people look forward to. So the distances are becoming flatter and flatter and shorter and shorter. Mm-hmm. And what I see as an advantage from Middle East, and Qatar is taking a very big role in becoming the connector between the East and the West, is that it's much more inclusive. I lived in Silicon Valley. I'm a woman, I'm Argentinian, so thank you for the comment on the World Cup. But I have to live through a lot of boys' club mentality from people that were just from the area. So it was not inclusive. Something that's very different in Middle East is that they are going out to the world, scouting innovation, to invite them to develop their businesses here. I never saw that from Silicon Valley. I was just knocking on the doors and saying, hey, hello, like I have a great company, and yeah, good. It's forced me to become a disruptor on the way that I founded my company, and I founded my company as well, because I think they were thinking with very old business model, even though they were disrupting on technology.
No, just quickly on that climate energy consumption question I asked, what are your thoughts, since climate is your business?
Yeah, so I'm not worried at all about our ability to build enough energy, clean energy, to supply whatever the demand may be. I do think there's an enormous opportunity for additional energy efficiency to mitigate that increase. What we see right now is it's up to business leaders and government leaders alike to choose what path we are on. We could very easily build all of the clean energy that we need and clean up the existing dirty energy that we have if we chose that. And so it's not always the simplest or easiest choice, but right now it's affordable and it's getting way cheaper. And so I think there are enormous opportunities for businesses to think proactively about, how do I locate my data center in a place where there's an enormous amount of renewable energy, sun and wind, but there's not a transmission line to get it into a place that needs electricity. Go put the energy use right there and bring in the data cable instead. And so I think folks are starting to think about energy and demand matching in new ways. And so that increase in demand actually is a potential pull for innovation if the business and government community chooses to go down that path.
It's a big if.
It's a big if.
Okay. Yeah, we could talk about that much longer. Konstantin, your biggest market is Europe. And you've said, or your brother, who's unfortunately not with us, Konstantin is standing in his place, but he said in our sort of lead up to this discussion that the GCC is more dynamic. What are you seeing here in this region that you're not seeing in Europe?
The most beautiful thing that I see here is such zest for opportunity, for growth, for drive, to develop the region and to make it something that will surpass the old world, if we decide to call it that, or even Silicon Valley. And this is why, for example, we've decided to partner here. We've got investment from the Sovereign Development Fund from UAE. We have a partnership with Qatar Airways. And we're right now investigating opportunities to build factories here in the region so that we can manufacture airplanes. And I see that as a great opportunity for the region to actually take the next, not just the next step, but the step afterwards, to actually start developing. And also on top of that, I would like to also go back to the energy question topic that was discussed. While AI and crypto and maybe other services as well are taking far more energy, I think the demand for their energy will be offset by the positive impact that they will have on the world around us. Meaning, in another word, let's say, give you an example with our aircraft. We're talking about hundreds of airplanes per factory per year to be manufactured in this region alone. Well, in order for us to operate all of these airplanes efficiently, and for not just for our clients, but just for the general environment, we will be looking at far more optimization of the routes, and that's what I said in the beginning, that AI will be a tool to help us optimize the network, which means that the energy that we'll spend optimizing the network will actually be offset by the fact that our planes are not just flying around randomly and are not actually wasting fuel and resources that are contributing both to the decline of the environment and having a social and economic impact. So this is the way I see it, and this is the place that I see it happening and having the most, the biggest effect, so to say.
I want to go slightly existential. Sam Altman was interviewed in Davos in January at one of our events, and he said something that I thought was quite striking that I just want to put to the panel. He said that AI augments us in ways we can't even imagine. What if everybody in the world had a really competent company of 10,000 great virtual employees, experts in every area? They never fought with each other. They didn't need to rest. They got really smart. At a rapid pace. What would we be able to create for each other? What would that do to the world we experience? Is that something you even want?
No, I don't think so. I think it's great to have the ability to use technology to make our lives and our work more efficient, but I think it should be used to make us work less time so we can have a life, because the world has shifted in a way in which we live to work instead of working to pay for the expenses of living. But I don't think that this will happen. First, the technology is not out there, and don't think it will be there to replace humans. Humans need to manage the technology, and this is how it has happened historically with all these tech revolutions of any kind. But I do believe that we need to think of a way to complement our skills so we can have better living instead of use them to replace the ways as we are living now.
If I may, I think it's a very quintessential question. Would there be any other alternate form that would surpass human intelligence and do it better, faster, cheaper? I think there would be. I think it's a question of time more than anything else, whether we'll see it by the end of this decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, but definitely it is scary. I subscribe. Do I like it? Absolutely not. I would say life would become very boring if I read that statement again. How boring? What is the purpose of us, being there? But The idea would be, again, how do we bring in ethics? How do we make it, much more responsible? And I think those questions need to be answered now, because a few years down, it would be way too late. And I don't think, we have an answer for that. Maybe Sam has. But
no, he doesn't. He said nobody knows.
But it is scary. It is scary. But at the same time, yeah, the opportunities are galore, infinite, in fact. But if you talk about the other side, which is the gory side of AI, I think we'll have to counterbalance that. It's a tough one, but we'll have to.
Yeah.
Well, and I think nobody knows is the right answer. But we do know that there are a lot of problems that need to be solved today that technologies like AI can help address. And I think climate change is a perfect example of that there's an enormous opportunity to take these tools and really apply them to the problems that we're facing today. And regardless of when you think the singularity might happen, we need an enormous amount of effort on climate change now. And so figuring out how to apply those tools to these problems, and I think it's just an amazing opportunity here, the amount of investment opportunity there is in both AI and climate. The US has this very investment-friendly climate policy framework where innovation is happening there, can be exported and scaled here and throughout the world. I think figuring out how to apply those tools in the real world today towards real problems that need solving is a no-regrets pathway forward.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the U.S. market. We know that there has been, and this is maybe a question for but everyone, there's been a big anti-ESG movement in parts of the U.S., and we've talked about how some companies are pushing back their targets on ESG because they can, or they think they can. I suppose my question is, what policy outcome are you most hoping for after the November U.S. presidential election?
So I think what's important is that Congress has created a climate policy framework that offers hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies to businesses that want to do clean energy, innovation, and deployment. It's up to business if they want to take advantage of hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies. It's not an ESG theory question. It's a cash question right now. And there are plenty of not just entrepreneurs, but very large industrial companies that see this as a pathway forward into the future, regardless of the rhetoric. The rhetoric is important when it's followed by action, and I'm deeply worried about what a different administration would do given that rhetoric and history of action. I think that regardless, Congress has set this policy framework that is going to be durable. The majority of these projects are happening in places that happen to be Republican districts. And I think that's not well understood, is that you don't have to talk about climate to benefit from what was enacted as climate policy. It's not actually called a climate bill. It's an infrastructure bill that funds so much of this innovation. And I think that's the heart of this, is that we're going to be resilient. The problem of climate is not going away, regardless of who gets elected in the US in November. And I think it's just really important that this is now up to industry to lead, and they are going to be able to make a profit with these investments, and that's where capital flows.
And it's not just domestic companies that are benefiting, it's international companies as well.
Both directly, and then I think the technology innovation that happens can be then exported everywhere. If solar and batteries and wind get really cheap because of subsidies that we provide, it doesn't get expensive somewhere else. The innovation is a benefit everywhere. And so I think that's really the key, is figuring out how industry can lead and take advantage of the subsidies in the US, but then make sure that those benefits are shared and exported in a way where we can clean up our energy sector globally.
Ron?
Well, I think it's a fundamental responsibility of every corporate, every individual to understand and appreciate what's happening to the climate. It's not a question of giving a candy and asking, if you do this, I'll give you a candy. But I think every organization, every institution, every government would need to endorse and bring in the reforms, if required, certain policies which are hard in nature, to enforce and hopefully sustain the future for our kids and generations to come.
We're unfortunately in the red, but I'm going to ask you really quickly, Silvina, just to Qatar. Because I think this is an area that you're focused on. Can you just quickly give us like a snapshot of what you may or may not be doing here?
Well, thank you, Jackie. I'm working not only on the digital asset side, but also I have an investment show called Unicoin Hunters that is like a Shark Tank, but on steroids, as we like to say, because it allows people from the global audience that watch the show to invest in companies that have unicorn potential, that can become billion-dollar businesses. And I'm working with Qatar to bring the show here so we can scout brilliant entrepreneurs. Climate change, of course, is one of our pillars, one of the very important ones, so they can pitch to the world and give people the opportunity to invest and take a stake of the companies that are transforming the future. And I think it's important because it's not only bringing diversity in terms of entrepreneurs that are from anywhere, not from Silicon Valley, but from anywhere in the world. As you know, like talent is universal, sometimes opportunities are not. So this kind of initiatives is giving people the opportunity to pitch to the world and investors or normal people like anyone that is in their house the opportunity to be part of that. I'm doing this with Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, or Rosy Rios, former treasurer of the United States, the former chief of administration of President Biden, Mo Bella, and hope that this will become mainstream. We're in the second season, and that will be able to get many entrepreneurs get funded.